There's a growing number of podcasters and authors in the state, and we like to get in on the conversation.
In today's Let's Talk, brought to you by CC's Physical Therapy, we talk with Kathy and Michael, the hosts of the new History Hot Dish podcast. Thank you guys for being here.
Our pleasure.
You're welcome.
History Hot Dish. It just makes
name.
me happy. I love it.
Yeah, Jason Tomanek, one of our executives, made it up because he said history is like a hot dish because you don't know what's in it. There's good, bad, there's cheese over here and sausages over here, and history is that kind of mix. Plus, you notice you remember the name, which is the key.
This is
very
true. Yeah, History Hot Dish. But Michael, I understand you're a retired history professor, and Kathy, you're a retired librarian. Does that help with research, right? Because I would imagine as a history professor, it's not all about history. You learn how to research as well, and as a librarian, you do just that.
I'd better, yes. Historians love librarians because even though no more card catalogs now, it's all electronic. But
sure.
She was an excellent librarian, and I use a library at the college a lot, and but now it's electronic. But you can't beat a person like this because she does everything for us, and some things way beyond what she should be doing. So
just going to throw that out there. Kathy, what type of stories are we going to hear if we tune into History Hot Dish?
Well, some of the past podcasts that we've had have dealt with, like United Tribes Technical College and the history of the campus. A lot of people may not be aware that during World War II it was an internment camp.
Oh, I had no idea.
Another interview that I had is about Linda Slaughter. And a lot of people know her because of her time as a postmistress, as an educator, but she's also an author. She was an amazing, amazing woman with an extraordinary life, and that is one that's going to be coming up soon. Another guest is going to be talking about Highland Acres and the history of that development and how it came to be and why it is laid out the way it is. So that's also going to be a very interesting episode.
That sounds interesting.
That does sound interesting. It's a great neighborhood.
Yeah, well, yeah.
yeah.
Well, okay, so how do you come up with your ideas? Is it just mainly focused in Bismarck, Mandan area?
Basically Bismarck. We had a committee that worked pretty hard for well over a year to come up with the podcast name, how we were going to do it, who would be hosting, and the types of programs that we would have. So we've got a fairly long list of candidates for future podcasts. We started taping the show in September so that we could have a nice library of production up and ready to go when we actually went live in January.
Yeah.
And right now we've aired about 3 podcasts.
And the idea is that there's people walking in the streets that we want to know more about. I'm a Bismarck brat myself, and one of the things I found out in interviewing is there's things that I didn't realize. For example, Jim Christensen, his dad founded Dakota Zoo, and he's a good friend of mine. And so what we do is we sit down with Jim, get some ideas of what he'd like to cover in 28 minutes.
It's fast.
And 28's good. And while he was preparing for it, he found history that his dad had written years ago that Jim didn't know about, with all sorts of things that the average person wouldn't know about Dakota Zoo. For example, Jim's dad wanted to promote it. So he took a pickup truck, put a lion in it, and parked it in front of a hotel downtown Bismarck. So when people walked out, they'd say, I believe there's a zoo around here. There better be, because there's a lion on the back of that pickup. Stuff like that. And
that doesn't even sound real.
Well, yeah. But he had so much material, he said it was possible maybe we could have 2 28-minute programs. And I said, of course. So the detail for Bismarckers, the famous bear from down there, the politics of getting it funded, Harold Schaefer involved. These are things most people don't know about. Another example, the history of the water supply of Bismarck. And I said to myself, oh, they'll pile in for that one, water supply. Well, Tom Atkinson's a lawyer, and he's a fanatic on engineering. He studied how Bismarck got its water supply. It was privately owned. The politics involved with Alexander McKinsey, in fact, his family was involved, made it fascinating on a topic we take for granted But as a good historian, there's things you can't take for granted, and you have to dig them out. So that's the kind of thing we do. We could pick you out, for example.
Let's do it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm open book.
We haven't
Let's
had
do
we
this.
haven't had a Kohlberg on the program. We'd sit down, Kate or I would sit down with you, and we'd find out what you would like to cover in 28 minutes, with the idea you're not limited to those topics, because some of the best things that we've gotten is they've gone off script. Some really good stuff, in fact. And so I sit down, make out a list of things. And we got there for 28 minutes. I'd sit down, or Kate would interview you, and you talk about yourself, your background, your profession, what it is to be on TV today, the stresses, the good, the bad, the underside maybe of the profession that the average person on the street wouldn't know. Because here's this beautiful woman, sparky, great. God knows what happens later on.
So, a couple of things. One, the history of the water supply in Bismarck. That sounds really interesting because last I checked, there's a giant river running right by it. So it's interesting that I want to tune into that, is what I'm getting at. Kathy, what's in the future for History Hot Dish? What do we have coming up next?
Let's see. May I look at your?
You certainly can.
Yes.
In fact, here's the tether list underneath is some of the things.
Okay. Some of the things that are coming up, of course, as Mike mentioned, the two-part Jim Christensen interview will be coming up. And then Jim Fugly, he will be talking about the history of the Highland Acres development. Tracy Potter is going to be visiting with us about the steamboats in Bismarck. The history of steamboating on the river is
Fascinating.
very fascinating. In fact, that was really the mode of transportation, because until the bridges were built, the traffic up and down the river, both as passenger transport and materials transport, that was the way that they did it.
Yeah,
And-
we picked Tracy out because he's the expert on steamboat. He's written the books and everything else, and he has anecdotes beyond his book. So the folks we pick out here aren't just people who walk off the street. They're in many cases experts in their field. So
Sure.
there's a good learning curve there.
I love it.
The
And
steamboating was just
Yeah.
fascinating.
it is fascinating, and History Hot Dish sounds fascinating. I wish we could talk for 28 minutes. Right now, we do have to wrap. Thanks for being here. We will make sure we get that list on our Facebook page and people know when
When
they
to
can
tune in.
Thank you much.
Wonderful.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
102.5 radio media access. 102.5.
Yeah, through
There we go.
Dakota
Got it.
Media.
Yeah.
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 Perfect.
Thanks, guys.
Well, this has been Let's Talk, brought to you by CC's Physical Therapy.
And you can listen to episodes on most streaming platforms, wherever podcasts are found. And for more information, go to bismarckhistory.org/historyhotdish. But still